Hub towns are nothing new in video games. Even in the earliest forms of RPGs, there were places where players could end up and take in the vibes, talk to the various locals, and restock on items in a safe space that was designed to make the player feel like they were not going to be attacked at a moment's notice. Most of the time, these hub towns are pretty static. A lot of the inhabitants are reactive and wait for the player to talk to them. Usually, these exist purely to help the player and serve as a convenient pit stop before the player heads off on a new adventure. The Legend of Zelda is not afraid to make use of these, and going all the way back to Zelda 2, where there were various towns that the player could wander into and interact with the NPCs, there's always been places within the series where the player can feel safe, and also get hints about what comes next in the story. Yet there's one town in the Legend of Zelda series that I would argue is so unique, so interesting, and just has a completely different atmosphere to everything else that the series has offered up over the years, but while offering up those same things that players come to expect from their hub towns. When you look at the likes of Windfall Island in Wind Waker, when you look at the Castle Town in Twilight Princess, and when you even look at Hyrule Castle Town and Kakariko Village over in Ocarina of Time, none of these spaces offer the kind of experience that I think Clock Town offers up in Majora's Mask. Heck, I'd even go as far as to say there are very few towns within the video game space that match the kind of atmosphere and overall vibes that Clock Town brings to the table, which is quite an impressive feat in my opinion. At the centre of Majora's Mask Termina sits Clock Town. It's a space where NPCs are living out their daily lives, whether you're there to witness it or not. It's where events unfold and things that the player needs to pay attention to are playing out. But it goes beyond just NPCs saying standard lines. There's a sense of dread and increasing fear as time passes. The game's internal clock moves forward, and as it does, the townsfolk begin to grow more fearful. Their reactions to the moon that's grinning down on them at all times becomes more apparent. The fear, the dread, the existential crisis that every one of these NPCs is going through, as each of them come to grips with the fact that their lives are probably going to be ending very soon. Clock Town doesn't exist just for the player to inhabit and to buy things and to rest. It exists as a space where NPCs are going through grief and they're reacting to the situation that they're about to be involved in real time. And because the player knows that the moon will crash and that all of these people will die at the end of the 3-day cycle, it makes everything feel incredibly tragic, because there are people who are fighting against it, people who want to believe that it's all a giant hoax, and you know that at the end of the 3 days they're going to be very, very wrong. It makes every interaction in the town feel that much more sad. It makes every unfolding storyline feel that much more tragic, because you understand that these are the dying acts of people who have no chance of surviving what's about to happen. You as the player have the ability to go back in time and relive everything over and over and over, but for these versions of the characters, that simply isn't an option. To them, on the dawn of the 4th day, it's the end of the world. Even just standing around Clock Town, you can see characters running around to live their lives, the postman popping out in the morning to collect all the mail to bring it back to his office. Anju walking heartbroken on the 2nd day as her heart is broken, and the realization that she's going to have to leave the town and thus leave her husband-to-be behind, even though she has no idea where he is. It's not just the ability to be in the right space at the right time, but also to make the decision of whether to intervene or not. Your actions have consequences in Clock Town, and if you do something, it will affect other parts of the town in ways that you cannot foresee. For me, there is no other town in video games like Clock Town, and it's a space that I will continue to revisit over and over and over, as I just cannot get enough of just what this space offers up. So now I'm going to do a guided talk about things that I actually like in the 3-day cycle. I'll talk about things I don't like as well, but I just wanted to give a more direct discussion about things that I think Clock Town just does so amazingly well. One of the things that I really like about Clock Town is that when you first enter it, it feels like a completely normal space. If you weren't paying attention to the moon above the town, everything here just feels very normal, feels very alive, and it feels like everything that's going on here isn't out of the ordinary. But if you pay attention, you can see various things going on right in front of your eyes here. For example, if you look over here, you can see that Cafe is heading to the post box, and when Cafe is doing this, it gives you the early indications of the largest storyline, I would argue, in Clock Town. You can see that she's dropping off a letter here that will later on be delivered, and you actually get to see these events unfold. But what I find really curious about this game is characters wander off screen and out of areas, but they continue to sort of exist. So if you come down here, you can actually see Cafe here heading to the hideout, and even though you can't interact with them, you do actually get to see where they logically end up. It's not like characters just walk off screen and they just disappear like they would in a lot of other video games from this time. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate. This kind of behavior makes it feel like all the characters are existing even when they're not in front of you on screen. It's a very small touch, but it allows this world to feel that much more richer because it feels like these characters are living out their lives out of view of you. Now, obviously, if you come here and start messing around with the bell, Cafe is going to very much not appreciate that. So well, we're going to leave them alone. But the fact that there's spaces like the laundry pool here that only exist to really push forward certain storylines and give moments to characters, it just really speaks to how considered a lot of the spaces in this town actually are. For example, this is supposed to be like the market space. The carpenters are all here building the tower and also building the stalls, but in the center of all this is the massive clock tower, and that clock tower basically stands tall over everything in this space. No matter where you go in Termina, you can usually see this thing popping out of the skyline, and it is quite an impressive feature. It's very unique and interesting, but hovering above it is the moon. And yes, that moon is going to get bigger. The more time you spend in Clocktown, the more you realize that this moon is going to pose an even bigger threat to everything that's going on. But one thing that I also really like is that the first few times you play in Clocktown and you're doing your cycles, you don't even understand what's really going on. Some characters like these guys here, they'll be in place, so they're not really going to be doing much except giving you normal NPC dialogue. But there are certain characters who, if you're around for the right time, you can actually see their stories unfolding. And it's just something that a lot of video games don't really consider. In a lot of video games, things can happen off screen and out of your view, and like I said earlier on, it adds a lot of weight to the proceedings here. So for example, you can see the leader of the performers here heading up to the mayor's office, and it happens at a very specific time, and it's really cool that you get to not only interact with him before this, but you get to see him actually walk up to it. As I said, there's no reason for this to be the case. In a lot of video games, you would just walk into a room and the characters would already be there. But the fact that the set dressing here involves the in-between part really adds layers to this experience. And the fact that Clocktown itself just looks so beaten down, it looks pretty grimy and nasty, and it feels like a lived-in space. It doesn't feel clean like Hyrule Castle Town felt in the young part of Link's life anyway. But another aspect that I really love about Clocktown is that if you're in the right space at the right time, you can see certain conversations play out. The game never tells you about these little interactions like this, but if you're there at the right time, you can see the characters actually talking to each other, showing off their personalities and giving you a bit of flavour to this world. You can get an idea for how these characters are all behaving with each other. It feels like there are interpersonal connections going on, and you can see that the performer leader is having a fun time at the minute. He thinks everything's going really well, but we know that as soon as he steps in this office here, it's all going to go pretty downhill for him, and that's pretty sad. And we even get to watch him walk in front of them, so we can even see the humiliation that's about to occur in real time. And again, I think this kind of thing really helps you to connect with all of these characters. A lot of the transactions you have with these characters are nothing out of the ordinary. A lot of them are here just to dispense various masks and items and give you heart pieces. But at the end of the day, their existence in this world is not dependent on you. If you're not here to see this meeting play out, the consequences of it still occur, and the characters will still move on to do what they do next. But the fact is, you get to be a living part of this experience. And even though it's quite mundane, even though it doesn't really add anything to the overall gameplay experience, it just adds depth. And that is what Clocktown has by the bucket loads. Depth in character building and depth in just atmosphere and interesting things for the player to spot. And the thing is, the game never truly pushes you in these directions. You have to find these moments for yourself. For example, wander into this door and we enter what is a very, very tense meeting between the city guards and the carnival organizers, all of whom are pretty much arguing the case in front of the mayor. And you can already get a sense through the music here, through the way the characters are talking to each other, that things are not completely agreeable. A lot of people in the town feel conflicted about what they should be doing, and it's very clear that that conflict lies at the center of every decision that's being made. Moments like this feel intense to the player because it makes it feel like there are actual stakes at play, even though everything in the town is predetermined and only a handful of things the player can actually truly influence. It makes the oncoming moon crash feel even more tragic because these people are actively trying to find a way to get around it, to survive it, but there are people who are literally fighting against it. And it just makes the conflicts within the town, the fight between those who want to keep the carnival going and the people that want to run for their lives, feel even more tragic because everyone just can't find common ground. Because the game leans so heavily on its clock system, you can wander into various spaces like the stock pot in here, for example, or some of the shops. And if you choose the wrong time, there won't be anyone there to serve you. Either they've gone away for their lunch, they're off doing other errands, or they just aren't available to help you. And it's kind of like real life. This is what goes on in real life. People don't just stand there for 12 hours and wait for someone to come and interact with them. In a lot of video games, characters just stand around and wait to dispense information to you. But as you can see here, we are seeing characters walk around. They're doing various errands. She's just tried to give that to her grandma, and her grandma does not like her food at all, which if you read her diary, you'll see that she's trying to find various ways to get out of eating the food. So I'll come back and check that on the second day. And when you go off to do other things, sometimes you'll cross paths with something that you've already interacted with. So here's the performer leader here heading into the milk bar. He's obviously very upset at the meeting and is leaving, but instead of going back to the Stockpot Inn where he started, he's just coming here to drink his troubles away. And once you interact with him here, you get a real sense that like he's just not happy at all with anything that is going on. And I really like how his demeanor through the day changes from cocky and arrogant to happy when he reaches the mayor's office to this absolute ball of anger and fury and upset here. This character, in the space of less than 6 in-game hours, has undergone this huge emotional arc, and you can help him by using the various masks on him to cheer him up. But at the end of the day, this is character depth, even if it's not deep character depth. It creates the illusion for the player that these characters are going through their own emotions and they have their own things that they're trying to work through. Side note, I like how this bar manager here insists that you wear your mask even when the moon is literally meters above your head in the bar, because he's just that much of a stickler. It really does add a bit of flavour to the ongoing proceedings here. But as you're seeing here, you'll walk out of the bar and you'll see the postman here doing his afternoon rounds. He's heading into the Stockpot Inn here. Now, remember earlier on when we saw Cafe posting that letter? Well, here's the interaction that we get to see her receive that letter, and we get to see the shock, and also we get to see a bit of personality here, because the postman here could just say where he got the letter from, but he clearly doesn't want to because he feels it goes against his oath to the town. So he's just kind of being a bit of a dick here, and she's like, just tell me. These little interactions add so much nuance and intrigue to the world. You just get the sense of personalities from these interactions and the spaces that they take place in as well. I mean, just look at what the hell are these masks? I assume they're supposed to be for the guardians around these spaces. I also like here that we can do a tiny bit of deception. In the 3DS version, they changed this so you have to be the Goron Link to make this happen, but I personally prefer the fact that you can get the key here as Human Link. It just feels really, really shady, but at the same time, it's really, really funny. And if we head upstairs, you can see that the Stockpot Inn has people walking around, people practicing their routines. They're having not a good time trying to figure out what they're actually meant to do. You can also see that this space is very, very dirty. The Stockpot Inn is a bit of a shambles in terms of, where you'd actually want to stay. It adds a bit of grimy realism to the ongoing situation. And talking to the performers here, you get an idea for what you're meant to do to try and help them out. A lot of these people you can help out in various ways, which is really nice because I feel like it gives every character that's been placed into this space that bit more realism and a bit more sort of sense of like purpose rather than just sort of walking around aimlessly. And then you get to see the consequences to your actions play out directly in front of you. So remember earlier on we took that key that we weren't meant to from the Stockpot Inn? Well, this is the Goron that actually has the same name as us, and they're the ones who wanted to stay for the carnival. But unfortunately, we've taken the key, and yes, once again, it's not just something that happens off screen. You can actually watch in real time as the Goron gets basically booted out the hotel for not being a guest. It's pretty interesting, it's pretty fun, and again, it just kind of gives you a sense of the level of detail that this game was aspiring for. The fact that you get to witness consequences within Clocktown. I would argue that outside of Clocktown, a lot of this isn't really a thing. A lot of the spaces outside, like Snowhead, for example, and the Goron village up there, are a lot more static, so there isn't really all that much going on in terms of live behaviour. But I would argue that Clocktown more than makes up for that. But Clocktown never loses sense of what it's actually meant to be. It's got a lot of the things that Hyrule Castletown in Ocarina of Time has, for example. It has various games that you can play, it has various shops that you can enter to restock up on, and there are various secrets that you can find. There's plenty of hidden chests and spaces and games for the player to make use of. One thing I would say in comparison between Majora's Mask's Clocktown and Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Castletown in particular, I feel like Hyrule Castletown doesn't really have all that much going for it outside of its day and night cycle. People don't tend to move around all that much. Everything's pretty static. And so once you've been into Hyrule Castletown a few times, everything begins to feel a bit samey. Whereas with Kakariko Village, I think Kakariko Village is arguably the more interesting space to stand in within Ocarina of Time, just because people actually move around, there's things going on in the village, and it does feel a little bit more lived in, even though weirdly time stops in that space. So if you enter at a particular time, you leave at a particular time, the same, because that's just the way it is. I also like how this shop here has multiple people who man the desk. So this guy's here during the day and he's here to sell us various wares and such, but if we come back here at the night time, there's another guy who works here part-time who's a lot less friendly and a lot less interested in actually helping us out. As I said earlier on though, it's not just the fact that you get to walk around this town and live within it. You actually get to help people, and as you saw earlier on, these ladies were wandering around the Stockpot Inn a bit worse for wear. They didn't really know what they wanted to do with their dance. But if you bring the right tools to the table and put on the right mask, you can actually help them out. And it does help to make the town feel that bit much more cheerful. I do love the use of cutscenes sometimes in this game because I love how it tries to make everything feel like it's improving the overall vibe of the town. So these women are watching us here and they'll start copying us. But then we get a nice little cut over to the guard who's watching all of this. Normally the game wouldn't pay attention to someone like this, but I think it really gives a bit of personality to the guards here because they're just kind of watching and chilling and enjoying the show for what it is, which is really, really nice. There's also the quiet moments with people like the postman here. He's just sat here practicing living his life and doing the things he needs to do to get through his working day. You can see the sense of dedication through all of the charts and all of the various maps on the walls. You can definitely tell that he is very driven, but as I said earlier on, the postman is one of the more tragic characters in this game because as time passes, his sense of duty really becomes a burden to him as a person. He wants to flee, and as you'll see on the third day, that becomes a crippling force that not only prevents him from saving himself, but also traps him in the very place that he loves the most. There's a sort of bitter irony to it, and only the player can really actually help him out of that bind, which I think is pretty fun. And speaking of quiet moments, if we head over to the laundry pool here, you can see that this performer is here just sort of enjoying the vibes and laying out some steam. You get to learn a bit about their backstories, and while it's not important in the overall context of things, the fact is the game never really directs you in this point. Like I said a few times, Majora's Mask doesn't really hold your hand. You can use the bomber's notebook to find various spaces, but ultimately it's up to you to explore the town and to find its full potential. But you also get to see the seedy underbelly of the town. It's not just a case of showing up and having a good time. You also need to make sure that you're being careful because, as you can see here, we are seeing some very shady characters hanging around behind various structures. And if you time it right and are here at the right moment, you can be involved in one of the biggest linchpins in the entire game. Now, the fact that the game gives you this opportunity without ever really telling you, you can pick up breadcrumbs that this might happen if you talk to the nice gentleman in the bomb shop. The fact that stuff like this can really change how the timeline plays out. If we choose to intervene here, we can give the bomb bag back to her, but it means Cafe and Andrew will never reunite because this bomb bag is actually needed to trigger him seeing the thief here later on, which plays a big part in that storyline. If, however, you use an arrow on it, no one's happy because the bomb bag blows up, he gets killed, and, well, Andrew will never be reunited. But if, as we do here, we actually choose to do nothing, we actually end up helping out other characters. So there's kind of a butterfly effect going on in the town. There are consequences and weight to your actions, and the things that you do directly hurt or make things better for various characters, whether intended or unintended. When we reach the second day, though, things begin to take a more darker shift. The music is no longer jovial and excited, it's more tragic and slightly more tense in the way that it's been composed. I have to say that the music direction in Clocktown really adds a lot to the layers of atmosphere. The moon is actually bigger in the sky, it hangs a lot lower, so the threat is very much there, and it also starts raining, so the town just feels like it's having a pretty dire day of it. And if you talk to various NPCs around the town, there's a bit more observation about the moon and the fact that things are probably going to end pretty badly. If you read the diary of the Nan in the Stockpot Inn, for example, she says that they're probably going to have to flee the next day. And if you don't help Andrew out in her side quest, this is the day where she will go and sit in the laundry pool, and then she basically has a conversation with her mum at the end of the day where she basically is told, you're coming with us whether you want to or not. But all this deniability, the fact that people are ignoring what is right above their heads and everyone's trying to carry on with this carnival in a way that doesn't really make sense to anyone with common sense, really speaks to the tragedy of Clocktown. Everyone here is trapped by obligation or by a desire to not die or by the fact that they're in complete denial. They don't want the moon to crash because if the moon crashes, they die. And that's obviously bad for them. But it's also the fact that people's stories continue to play out. The postman here heads out on his morning collection round, and the various performers are in various states of upset or happy, or basically, if you don't intervene, Clocktown becomes quite a depressing place on the second day, and everyone's just kind of miserable and sad. For example, if you come here after not helping Andrew, it's actually Andrew's mum who is stood here, and she basically doesn't have any time for you. She doesn't really care, which is pretty funny if you ask me. But when we head upstairs, you can see that the mood has changed slightly because of our interventions. The performers are, on the whole, a lot happier, but the leader is over here on the bed, just quite miserable and muttering to themselves about how they're going to be, very much leaving on the third day. You can see all the performers here as well. They're fully aware that something seems to be wrong, but ultimately they're not the ones in charge. But if we look here, you can see this is a pretty sad state of affairs. We followed him around for most of yesterday, and he just seems pretty sad and miserable, and it's quite sorry to see them in this state. But at the end of the day, seeing the characters like that, it's important to the overall themings of the game. Life moves on, life continues to march forward, and in this game, that is the core principle. Everything continues. For example, here we are seeing Anju cooking dinner for her grandma who absolutely hates her food, and we are going to witness this here because once again, this is an interaction that you don't get told about. It's just here to add flavor to the world. I also think it's pretty cool that the Stockpot Inn and Clocktown are very much the centerpieces for a lot of these interactions. I understand some people will say, well, it doesn't really happen outside of Clocktown, and like I said earlier on, if you go to Snowhead or Zora's Domain, it doesn't really feel all that impressive compared to this. But at the same time, like, you grow attached to these characters through their actions. You can see here that the grandma just really does not want to eat the food. And in a lot of RPGs, you might see this like if you were really, really lucky, or you might get told about it secondhand. But here you actually get to stumble upon the conversation as it's happening live. But as I said, the second day is arguably one of the more depressing days in any video game because if you choose not to help Anju out on the first day, then she has absolutely nothing to hope for. She just kind of becomes this sad person who wanders through the rain and is just generally down about everything. It's kind of sad to see, but like I said, these are the opportunities that you afford yourself if you pay attention and you also know what you're doing because you can easily craft these experiences to happen. And I know that for a lot of people, this kind of depth doesn't really add much to the overall gameplay. This is all just story, and it gets in the way of The Legend of Zelda, the actual game. But Majora's Mask is about more than just the core gameplay experience. It's about sadness, it's about depression, it's about accepting one's fate, and ultimately it really just underlines the fact that even with the limited resources available on Nintendo 64, you could create this kind of experience, an experience where we are literally watching a character break down in the rain because they are that sad about everything that is going on. It's very, very sad and very, very dark for a Nintendo 64 game. But it's these stolen moments that are the most important part of Majora's Mask, in my opinion. If these weren't here, and if Clocktown was just another hub world where things just happen in a very static way, I don't believe Majora's Mask would have left quite an impression as it does on a lot of people. Majora's Mask is a game about inflection and looking at oneself in a tragic situation. It's about dealing with the stages of grief and trying to overcome that, while also trying to be a hero and overcoming the grief of losing Navi and the life that Link once knew. In order to get the full context of moments and relationships between characters, sometimes you just have to be in the right space at the right time. The growing sense of dread and terror driving characters to make choices that are hard, brutal, but ultimately for the best of their existence. It's not easy to see some of these cutscenes play out because you know these characters are fighting against their better judgments, but at the same time, it's not just the events around them, it's within the entire town, and all of Termina as well. It's a very sad and very lonely and very sort of miserable existence for these beings. But it's also a town where anything can happen at any time. And if you're in the right spot, as I've said a few times, you can see moments that really will prove pivotal in the future of the town and determining how the inhabitants of it exist. Clocktown is not without mystery and without a sense of irony. There's a lot of times in the town where in its darkest corners, in the places where you really don't want to go exploring, you can find happiness and you can maybe even find solutions to problems. For example, we're in the curiosity shop here. I would argue this is the most dodgy part of the entire town, but coming in here and allowing this situation to play out by not saving the bomb bag on the first night means that we are helping Cafe and Anju to reunite. But this is a moment that, once again, we get to see. We don't just get told about it by characters who say that this happened off screen. You actually get to watch this occur. But the characters feel like they have such weight. As you can see here, the Curiosity Store manager knows that this bag is stolen, knows where it comes from, and yet he's still haggling down on the price. As said, all the characters in this town just end up with so much character building and so much depth to them, even though you wouldn't really expect that. And then we reach the final day. This is where things really begin to fall apart. The music kind of goes off the chain. The characters really are upset about what's about to happen. They don't really hide their feelings or their fears anymore. The NPCs that you've spoken to many times throughout this experience, they just start saying that they're going to leave the town, that they're terrified about what's going to happen. As you can see here, the carpenters, who've been pretty jovial up to now, are saying that they're going to be leaving, and it just all begins to feel a bit sad. Not only is it the music, but look at the guards here. They're quivering in fear. And when you talk to them, they're basically telling you that, yes, now is a great time to get out of the town. You don't really want to be here. The music, the atmosphere, that absolute sense of dread from all the characters, it is so prevalent and it's everywhere in the experience here. Even when you go into the Stockpot Inn, they're basically telling you that, yes, this place is going to be abandoned very, very soon, and that you should probably do the same. If you go looking upstairs, I don't quite know why Anju is up here sweeping away, because, who's going to be here when it's flattened into rubble? But I guess, you've got to keep yourself busy as the rest of the day sort of plays out. But it's also the fact that people like the swordsman here, they talk a big game, saying that they're going to protect the town from the moon by slicing it in half. He gives it all that and then basically tries to sell you his services. He's literally using the end of the world as a way to sell his sword courses to you, which is pretty funny when you think about it. As I said earlier on, though, it's not just people trying to be brave. The postman here, for example, is completely conflicted. They want to leave, they want to get out of this town, but they feel honor bound to stay. It's a personal battle going on inside their head and their heart. And the letter here is just quite tragic, because he's literally requesting himself to leave and he can't bring himself to do that. It's moments like walking into the mayor's residence and seeing the grimace of the guards here, understanding that they are honor bound to stay and protect the town, even though the town is going to be destroyed and there's nothing they can do about it. This is their final few hours, and here they are, just sad and miserable, dejected by the fact that they are forced to remain, even though they don't want to. Their hearts are saying to leave. And even the mayor who made that call doesn't think it's the right decision. He just did it because he felt that if he didn't do it, the consequences for the town would be bad. He is in denial, complete denial, arguing against a situation that he has no control over. You can see the receptionist has long since left, and the town just has this really awkward glow about it. It feels very dark, it feels very miserable. And when you go into the shops that you've been wandering into for the last few days, they're just abandoned. There's no one here to take your money. There's nothing here for the player to do. All you can do is watch as the spaces that you've enjoyed over the last few hours just completely disappear and empty out. Well, for the most part. I mean, for some reason, the bow and arrow guy will stay until the very, very, very end, which I think is pretty interesting. But it's just an interesting touch that the developers didn't just have the characters stand around and accept their fate. They've gone. The town is losing its heart, the very soul that's kept it together for the last 3 days. It's just gone. And when you explore these spaces, it just feels tragic. These are spaces that were filled with life just 3 days ago. Characters coming in, out, interactions that were very impressive, and all of these spaces just feel darker for not having the characters in them. Clocktown feels like it's had its heart ripped out, and the moon is going to destroy what's left. The earth shakes as well. Like, it really does feel like you are at the tip of the world here, the end of everything. And then, of course, if you influence certain characters to stay, you are adding to the body count, because Anju here is going to see in the day whether she thinks it's a good idea or not. Her heart is telling her to remain. She's fought against her mum's wishes. But like I said, the use of the spaces here, just the fact that the candles are out, the fact that it doesn't feel like anyone's meant to be here. You're here because you are duty bound as the hero to try and fight the moon off. And everyone else who's here is either accepting their fate or in complete denial over what's about to happen. There are certain characters who will fight until the end. They insist that this is not happening and they will not be party to the panic. But when you look up at the moon and you just see how huge it is in the sky here, and when you just feel the complete lack of any kind of human excitement for this carnival that's meant to be happening the next day, it really, really is quite terrifying. But then you enter the final 6 hours, and that music, the music, the atmosphere, everything about the final 6 hours here, I can honestly say there are very few video games that even come close to evoking this kind of imagery, the sense of dread, the terror, everything that this last 6 hours is unique to Majora's Mask, in my opinion. You really feel like it's the end of everything and that there's nothing here to stay for. The people that are here can't leave. They don't want to leave. And as you'll see in a second, some are even choosing fear when they've presented nothing but bravery up to now. The swordsman that was giving it all earlier on, saying they were going to slice the moon in half, dropping a sign here saying that they're on vacation, but heading to the back here, and look who it is who's cowering against the corner here. I'm scared, I can't take it, I don't want to die. Explicitly telling you that they're going to die in the next few hours and that nothing is going to save them. Even they, with their bravado, could not save themselves. But even at the end of everything, there's hope, and that's one thing that Majora's Mask constantly pushes. While Majora's Mask is a dark game, it's a very sad game, and it's a game that's all about grief and understanding grief and coming to terms with it. There are brief moments of genuine excitement and happiness. Here, for example, we have done what the postman needs to leave the town. They are freed by the mayor's wife, who tells them that they're stupid for staying and they shouldn't be here. And it's really, really interesting to me that a game that leans so heavily into that sort of dark aesthetic, that broody understanding of what it is to be human, even at the end of their lives here, the postman, knowing very well he's probably not going to be able to survive, is still very excited to leave. And this brings me great joy seeing him dance off here, because I feel like, it's just really, really nice to see him get his happy ending. But then again, Clocktown isn't all about being miserable. It may be a dark place, it may be filled with such anger and resentment and sadness and anger and frustration at everything that's going on. But there are quiet moments of enjoyment, of happiness, genuine human emotions that come to the surface. And I always find these moments are particularly bright in Majora's Mask, because it feels like to have these moments, you've really got to work towards them. These moments are completely optional. You never have to finish this storyline if you really don't want to, because the game will finish regardless if you go to the four temples. But for me personally, Clocktown plays host to some of the best moments in Majora's Mask. It isn't just a hub town. For me, it is a living, breathing space where everyone who lives in the town becomes a character within a wider performance. The town itself becomes a living character in your adventure. It becomes something much bigger than I think a lot of people really think it will be when they enter the game. It's one of those situations for me where I feel like Clocktown understands the game's emotions, its tones, and it's been crafted in such a way that I feel like people who love Majora's Mask just get what Clocktown is. And people who don't like Majora's Mask, I think it's because they don't feel that connection between the setting, the sense of dread, and all the characters. It's not just Link's adventure, it's everyone's existential crisis playing out in unison. Clocktown is one of my absolute favourite spaces to end up in any video game. I will actually play Majora's Mask just to spend time in this town. For me, this is one of the richest, most fun, most interesting spaces in any video game. And if Nintendo were to ever remake this like they are doing with Ocarina of Time, I would worry that a modern Nintendo would not really understand what makes this so great. Majora's Mask, in my opinion, is an amazing game, but it's amazing not because of the core gameplay mechanics. Ocarina of Time was amazing for that. This takes things to a different level in terms of human emotion, all of those fears and all of the things that I think just make it great to be human. Clocktown may not be a living, breathing person, but in my opinion, it is every bit as interesting as any character in the Legend of Zelda series, and for that, I can't thank the game enough.